The moon hung low over the whispering woods, its silver light fractured by the gnarled branches of ancient oaks, casting shadows that twisted like the claws of forgotten beasts. A chill wind slithered through the underbrush, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the distant howls of pursuit. Leaves rustled underfoot, brittle and damp with the night's dew, as if the forest itself held its breath in anticipation of violence. Elara moved like a ghost through the mist-shrouded trees, her bare feet silent on the mossy earth. Her cloak, frayed at the edges from years of wandering, blended with the gloom. But her eyes, sharp and emerald as the heart of a storm, pierced the darkness. She was no stranger to these woods. They had been her cradle and her cage since the day her village burned, leaving her with scars that itched like whispers from the grave. Tonight, though, the air hummed with something more than the usual sorrow. A raw, primal desperation that pulled at her like an unseen thread. The snarls came first, low and guttural, echoing from the ridge ahead. Then the crack of whips and the barked commands of men, hunters. Elara's hand instinctively went to the dagger at her belt, its hilt worn smooth by her grip. She had evaded their kind before, slipping through their nets like smoke, but this prey was different. She could feel it in the tremor of the ground, in the way the wind carried not just fear, but fury. Crouching behind a fallen log, she peered through the ferns. There, in a small clearing, bathed in moonlight, a figure fought for his life. He was a rogue. That much was clear from his ragged leathers and the wild tangle of dark hair matted with sweat and blood. 5 hunters circled him, their torches sputtering like malevolent eyes, iron-tipped spears glinting. They were no ordinary trackers. Their cloaks bore the insignia of the Ironfang Guild, ruthless enforcers of the fractured kingdom's laws, paid to cull the beasts that lurked beyond the walls of Eldoria. The rogue lunged, his movements a blur of desperate grace. He disarmed one hunter with a savage twist, sending the man crumpling into the undergrowth with a gurgle. But another struck true, a whip lashed across his back, drawing a line of crimson that soaked through his shirt. He staggered, breath ragged, eyes flashing with a feral gold in the firelight. Not human eyes, Elara realized with a jolt. Shifter's eyes, a wolf's gaze, wild and unbroken. "Why fight it, cur?" the lead hunter sneered, his voice gravelly as grinding stones. He was a brute, face scarred from old battles, his spear poised. "The Alpha's decree is clear. No rogues in these lands. You'll hang from the walls come dawn, or we'll skin you alive right here." The rogue spat blood onto the earth, his lips curling in a defiant snarl. "Your Alpha's throne is built on lies," he growled, voice low and resonant like thunder rolling through the trees. "Hunt me all you want, you'll find only teeth." Elara's heart pounded, a mix of pity and something deeper stirring in her chest. She had seen shifters before, outcasts, cursed by the old blood magic that twisted man into beast under the moon's pull. But this one, he carried himself with a quiet authority, even on his knees. The hunters closed in, their laughter harsh against the night's silence. One raised his spear for the killing blow. She couldn't watch it. Not this. With a breath that tasted of pine and regret, Elara burst from her hiding place, her dagger flashing as she hurled a stone into the torch of the nearest hunter. It sputtered and died, plunging half the clearing into shadow. The men whirled, confusion rippling through their ranks. "What sorcery?" the leader barked, but Elara was already moving. She tackled the spearman from behind, her blade slicing through tendon and cloth. He howled, dropping his weapon as she rolled away, snatching it up in one fluid motion. The rogue seized the moment, surging forward to slam his fist into another's jaw with bone-cracking force. Chaos erupted. Torches swung wildly, illuminating glimpses of fury, the rogue's claws extending from his fingertips, not fully shifted, but enough to rend flesh. Elara dodging a whip sting, her own strikes precise and born of survival's harsh lessons. She felt the burn of a shallow cut across her arm, warm blood trickling down her skin, but adrenaline drowned the pain. Together, they were a storm, her agility weaving through the hunter's brute strength, his raw power shattering their line. One by one, the men fell. The leader lunged at Elara, spear thrusting like a serpent's fang, but the rogue intercepted, taking the blow to his shoulder. A guttural roar escaped him as he twisted the weapon free and drove it back into the hunter's chest. The man gasped, eyes wide with shock, before slumping lifeless to the forest floor. Silence descended, broken only by their heaving breaths and the drip of blood onto leaves. The rogue turned to her, his golden eyes locking onto hers, intense and searching. Up close, he was broader than she'd thought, his frame corded with muscle beneath the wounds that marred his skin. Dirt and gore streaked his face, but there was a nobility in the set of his jaw, a king's bearing hidden in a beggar's rags. "You? Why?" he rasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. His voice held no accusation, only raw curiosity laced with pain. Elara sheathed her dagger, her hands trembling now that the fight had ebbed. She met his gaze, seeing not a monster, but a soul adrift, much like her own. "Because no one deserves to die like prey," she said softly, the words carrying the weight of her own losses. "And because your eyes, they burn with more than hate." He studied her for a long moment, the wind whispering secrets through the trees. Then with a wince he straightened, a faint smile ghosting his lips, equal parts gratitude and wariness. "Foolish mercy in these woods. They'll come again, stronger." "Let them," Elara replied, tearing a strip from her cloak to bind his wound. Her fingers brushed his skin, warm despite the chill night, sending an unexpected spark through her. "I'm not done running yet." As the first hints of dawn bled through the canopy, staining the sky with reluctant pink, they vanished into the deeper woods together. The forest seemed to sigh around them, ancient and watchful, as if it knew the threads of fate had just begun to tangle. Elara didn't know his name, nor the shadows that hunted him, but in that fragile alliance, she felt the stirrings of something profound, a light piercing the endless dark. The dawn light filtered through the whispering woods like hesitant fingers, painting the mist in hues of bruised lavender and gold. Elara led the way, her steps sure on the uneven path of roots and fallen needles, the rogue close behind, his presence a heavy warmth at her back, mingled with the coppery scent of his wounds. The air grew thicker here, laced with the earthy rot of hidden hollows and the faint, sweet decay of wildflowers crushed underfoot. Birds stirred in the canopy, their calls sharp and wary, as if the forest mourned the violence left in the clearing. They moved in silence at first, the only sounds their labored breaths and the occasional snap of a twig. Elara's arm throbbed where the whip had grazed her, a shallow fire that pulsed with each heartbeat, but she pushed it aside. Survival demanded focus, and this stranger, this shifter, had become her shadow, bound by the fragile thread of shared blood on the leaves. She glanced back once, catching his profile etched against the rising sun. Jaw clenched, eyes scanning the tree line with predatory vigilance. His shoulder, hastily bound with her cloak's remnant, seeped crimson through the fabric, staining it like spilled wine. "We can't stop yet," she murmured, voice low as the rustle of leaves. "The guild's hounds will pick up the trail by midday. There's a ravine ahead, swift water, hard to cross. It'll buy us time." He nodded, a grunt escaping his lips that sounded more beast than man. "Time for what? To drag you into my curse?" His words carried a rough edge, laced with the pain he refused to voice. Up close, in the softening light, she saw the scars that mapped his skin, old and new, like a chronicle of battles etched in flesh. Not the marks of a common rogue, but of one who had led, lost, and lingered on the edge of savagery. Elara didn't answer immediately. She ducked under a low-hanging branch heavy with dew, droplets cascading down her neck like cold tears. The path narrowed, forcing them closer, and she felt the brush of his arm against hers, a spark that jolted through her, unbidden and electric. Why him? Why now? Her own scars itched in response. Ghosts of the fire that had claimed her family, leaving her to wander these woods as a wraith, healing what she could with herbs and hushed prayers to forgotten gods. Shifters were omens, harbingers of chaos in the tales of Eldoria, yet his eyes held no madness, only a deep, shadowed hunger. They reached the ravine as the sun crested fully, its rays piercing the mist to reveal a chasm carved by centuries of relentless rain. The river below roared, frothing white over jagged rocks, its spray rising like spectral breath. Moss-cloaked boulders lined the edge, slick and treacherous. Elara tested the first crossing stone with her toe, balancing as the water's chill mist kissed her skin. "Follow my steps," she said. Extending a hand without thinking, he took it, his grip firm and calloused, warmer than the morning air. For a moment, as they leapt from stone to stone, the world narrowed to the rhythm of their breaths, sinking with the river's fury, the slap of water, the grit underfoot, the distant echo of pursuit that might or might not be real. On the far bank, hidden by a thicket of thorned vines, they collapsed against a weathered outcrop. The rogue slid down, back to the stone, his face paling as blood loss clawed at him. Elara knelt beside him, unpacking a small pouch from her satchel. Yarrow leaves for clotting, willow bark for fever. Her fingers worked swiftly, peeling back the makeshift bandage to reveal the wound, a deep gash from the spear, edges ragged and angry. "This will sting," she warned, pressing the crushed herbs into the flesh. He hissed through his teeth, golden eyes flashing but held still. The scent of crushed green mingled with his blood, sharp and vital, grounding her in the moment. "Why risk it?" he asked again, voice strained but steady. "A lone wanderer like you, saving a marked man. The guild doesn't forget debts." Elara met his gaze, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Marked! You're more than their prey. I saw it in the fight, the way you moved like the woods themselves bent to you." She tied off the fresh binding, her touch lingering a fraction too long on the taut muscle of his shoulder. A shiver ran through him, not from pain, and she pulled back, heat rising to her cheeks. He chuckled, a low rumble that echoed the river's growl, perceptive but dangerous. "My name is Thorn, and what you saw, it's the blood of the old packs, Alpha blood." The word hung between them, heavy as the mist. Alpha. Not just any shifter, but royalty among the cursed, leader of the hidden clans, whispered to command the wilds with a mere howl. Yet here he was, broken and hunted, far from any throne. Ilara's breath caught. Legends spoke of the Alpha King, vanished after the Iron Fang's purge, his kin slaughtered to shatter the shifter alliances. If this was him. "The hunters called you rogue," said the Alpha's decree. "Lies!" Thorn snarled, fist clenching against the stone until his knuckles whitened. "I am the Alpha, exiled by betrayal within my own ranks, painted as the monster to unite the kingdom against us. The guild serves the false throne now, culling what remains of my people." His eyes darkened, the gold flecked with storm-grey sorrow. "And you? What chains you to these shadows?" She hesitated, the words tasting of ash on her tongue. "Elara, my village. Gone in flames 5 winters past. Raiders from Eldoria claiming shifter spies. I survived by hiding, learning the wood's secrets, healing where I can, but mostly just enduring." The admission slipped out, raw as an open wound, pulled by the vulnerability in his stare. For the first time in years, the solitude cracked, a sliver of light piercing her guarded heart. Thorn reached out, his hand covering hers briefly, rough yet gentle, like the earth cradling a fragile seed. "Enduring isn't living, Elara, but perhaps, together, we rewrite the hunt." The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken promises, the river's roar fading to a distant lullaby. But the woods stirred. A low growl echoed from across the ravine, not wind, not beast, but something older. Thorn tensed, sniffing the air, his body coiling as if the shift clawed at his edges. They're here, not the guild, worse. Elara stood, dagger in hand, heart pounding with a mix of dread and fierce resolve. The mist swirled, parting to reveal shapes in the trees, hulking silhouettes with eyes like embers, the scent of musk and malice drifting on the breeze. Pack enforcers, rogue shifters turned mercenaries, drawn by the blood trail. Thorn rose beside her, wounds forgotten in the surge of primal fury, his claws lengthening as the first snarl ripped from his throat. The clash came swift and savage. One beast lunged from the underbrush, jaws snapping, but Elara sidestepped, driving her dagger into its flank with a cry that blended fear and fire. Thorn met another head-on, his partial shift granting him fangs and speed, a whirlwind of fur and fury that tore through hide and bone. Claws raked his side, drawing fresh blood, but he pressed on, protecting her flank with a roar that shook the leaves. Pain bloomed in Elara's thigh as a paw swiped close, tearing cloth and skin, but she fought through it, her strikes fueled by the bond forming in the chaos. Together, they drove the attackers back, bodies crumpling into the river's embrace, the water claiming them with indifferent hunger. Panting, bloodied anew, they leaned on each other as the echoes faded. Thorn's arm around her waist was both support and anchor, his breath hot against her ear. "You fight like one of us," he whispered, awe threading his voice. "And you lead like a king," she replied, the words a vow, in the gathering noon light. The woods watched, ancient and unyielding, as their paths entwined deeper, the first threads of destiny weaving through the pain. But in the distance, more howls rose, a tide of hunters closing in, and with them, the shadows of Thorn's hidden throne. The sun climbed higher, its light fracturing through the dense canopy of the whispering woods, like shards of fractured glass, dappling the forest floor in mottled patterns that danced with every sway of the leaves. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and wild mint, undercut by the sharp, acrid tang of blood, fresh and lingering from their latest skirmish. Elara's thigh burned with each step, the gash from the rogue shifter's claw, an insistent throb that radiated heat up her leg, but she pressed on, her hand steady on Thorn's arm as they wove through the undergrowth. His weight leaned against her more than before, the toll of his wounds etching lines of exhaustion into his face, yet his golden eyes remained alert, scanning the shadows with the unyielding focus of a predator, cornered but unbroken. They had pushed deeper into the heart of the woods, where the trees grew ancient and sentinel-like, their trunks twisted into grotesque shapes that whispered of old curses woven into the bark, vines draped like funeral shrouds, heavy with dew that dripped in rhythmic plinks onto the moss below. The river's roar had faded behind them, replaced by an oppressive quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures scurrying away. Elara's mind raced, piecing together the fragments Thorn had shared. The Alpha King, betrayed and exiled, his pack shattered by whispers of treachery from within. The Iron Fang Guild wasn't just hunting rogues, they were erasing a legacy, propping up a false throne in Eldoria's crumbling spires. And now she was entangled in it, her solitary existence upended by this man whose touch ignited something dormant within her, a flicker of belonging amid the isolation that had defined her scars. Thorn stumbled slightly over a root, a low growl escaping his lips as pain lanced through his side. Elara tightened her grip, guiding him toward a concealed hollow beneath an overhanging cliff, its face etched with faint runes that glowed faintly in the dappled light, remnants of the old shifter enclaves, long abandoned. "Here," she breathed, easing him down onto a bed of soft ferns that cushioned like forgotten dreams. The air in the hollow was cooler, laced with the musty scent of stone and hidden water, a brief sanctuary from the encroaching pursuit. She knelt before him, unpacking more from her satchel, a salve of comfrey and honey, sticky and aromatic, to soothe the fresh claw marks raking his ribs. Her fingers trembled as she applied it, the warmth of his skin seeping through her palms, contrasting the chill that had settled in her bones from the fight. Up close, in this stolen moment of respite, she traced the map of his body, not just scars, but the subtle shift of muscle beneath, the way his breath hitched when her touch grazed a particularly tender spot. He watched her, unblinking, the gold in his eyes softening to amber, like embers banked against the night. "You shouldn't have to do this," Thorn murmured, his voice a gravelly rumble that vibrated through the hollow, stirring the ferns. "Bind a king's wounds with a healer's hands. What if they find us here? The guild spies are everywhere, birds with eyes, shadows that report to the false alpha." Elara paused, her hand lingering on his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath the ragged cloth. The confession hung between them, heavy as the vines overhead, pulling at the threads of her own guarded past. "A king in rags is still a king," she replied softly, her voice weaving through the quiet like a thread of silk. "And I've carried heavier burdens alone, the flames that took my family. They left me with more than scars, a gift perhaps, or a curse. I feel the earth's pulse, the hidden veins of power in these woods. It led me to you." His hand rose, calloused fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, the gesture tender yet charged, like lightning veiled in mist. The contact sent a shiver down her spine, awakening sensations she'd long buried under layers of survival, warmth blooming in her core, a yearning that tasted of forbidden fruit. Thorn's gaze deepened, searching hers, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. The faint salt of sweat on his skin, the earthy musk that clung to him like a second shadow, the way his breath mingled with hers in the confined air. Before he could speak, a tremor rippled through the ground, subtle at first, like the distant footfall of giants. Thorn's body tensed, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled sharply. "They're coming," he whispered, urgency sharpening his tone. "Not just enforcers, the Huntmaster himself, Vargas, the guild's blade. He bears the iron collar, forged to suppress shifts. If he takes me—" Ilara's heart clenched, a vice of fear and resolve twisting within her. She helped him to his feet, their bodies pressing close in the narrow hollow, his arm around her shoulders a solid anchor. They emerged into the fading light of afternoon, the woods alive now with ominous signs, birds fleeing in flocks, their wings beating like war drums, the wind carrying the faint clang of metal and the baying of spectral hounds, ethereal beasts bound by dark sorcery to track the scent of blood and magic. They ran, the forest blurring into a tapestry of green and shadow, branches whipping at their faces like vengeful spirits. Elara's wounded thigh screamed in protest, each stride a jolt of fire, but she matched Thorn's pace, her hand clasped in his, drawing strength from the primal energy that pulsed through him. The ground sloped downward into a fog-choked valley where twisted oaks formed a natural labyrinth, their roots arching like the ribs of some colossal beast. The air grew thick, saturated with the rot of fallen leaves and the metallic promise of rain, thunder rumbling low on the horizon. Vargas's forces burst from the tree line behind them. A dozen strong, armored in blackened leather etched with warding runes, their leader astride a massive war steed that snorted plumes of frost-tipped breath. The Huntmaster was a spectre of a man, tall and gaunt, his face half masked by an iron visor that gleamed with unnatural cold. In his hand he wielded a chain tipped with barbs that hummed with suppressing magic, designed to bind shifters and strip their essence. "Thorn, the Pretender's throne demands your head," Vargas bellowed, his voice echoing like cracking ice, spurring his men forward. Arrows whistled through the air, one grazing Elara's shoulder, drawing a hot line of blood that soaked her cloak. She cried out, but Thorn pulled her behind a root barrier, his body shielding hers as he partially shifted, claws extending, fangs bared in a snarl that shook the valley. The clash erupted in a frenzy of steel and fury. Thorn lunged at the nearest rider, ripping the man from his saddle with a roar that blended man and wolf, his wounds reopening in sprays of crimson. Elara fought beside him, her dagger a blur, as she severed a hound's ethereal tether, the beast dissolving into wisps of shadow with a keening wail. Pain blurred her vision, but adrenaline surged, fueled by the sight of Thorn, majestic in his rage. Every strike a testament to the king he was born to be. Yet Vargas closed in, his chain lashing out like a serpent, wrapping around Thorn's ankle and yanking him to the ground. The suppressing magic flared, blue fire licking at Thorn's skin, forcing a pained howl from his throat as his shift receded, leaving him vulnerable, human frailty exposed. Elara's world tilted, desperation clawing at her chest. She charged, tackling Vargas from the steed, her nails raking his exposed neck as they tumbled into the mud. The chain slackened, and Thorn surged free, but not before Vargas's blade sliced across Elara's side, a deep gash that bloomed with agony. Her blood mingling with the earth, Thorn finished it, driving his fist into Vargas's chest with a crack of bone, the Huntmaster's eyes widening in shock before glazing over. The remaining hunters faltered, retreating into the fog as thunder cracked overhead, rain beginning to fall in heavy sheets that washed the valley in silver. Elara slumped against Thorn, her vision swimming, the warmth of her blood seeping between his fingers as he pressed against the wound. "Stay with me," he urged, his voice breaking, raw with a fear that mirrored her own, a king's vulnerability laid bare. In the storm's embrace, as lightning illuminated the ruins of battle, their bond deepened, forged in sacrifice, the first true glimpse of the power they might wield together. But the rain carried whispers of more to come, the false throne's shadows lengthening across the land. Rain hammered the valley like the tears of forgotten gods, turning the earth to a slick mire that sucked at their boots with greedy insistence. Elara's world had narrowed to the press of Thorn's body against hers, his arms a cage of muscle and desperation, as he half carried her through the storm-lashed oaks. Lightning forked across the bruised sky, illuminating the carnage left behind, twisted bodies half sunk in mud, the Huntmaster's iron visor glinting like a discarded crown amid the downpour. The air reeked of ozone and iron-rich blood, mingling with the petrichor that rose from the sodden ground, a primal perfume that spoke of renewal even as pain clawed at her side. Each step sent fresh waves of fire through the gash in her ribs, the wound a ragged mouth that wept crimson, soaking her tunic until it clung cold and heavy to her skin. Elara bit back a gasp, her fingers digging into Thorn's shoulder, feeling the tremor in his frame from his own reopened injuries. His breath came in ragged bursts, hot against her temple, carrying the faint wild scent of fur and forest that marked him as more than man. "Hold on!" he growled, the words vibrating through her like a distant thunder. "There's a shrine ahead, old pack ground. It hides the worthy." The woods seemed to conspire with them, branches parting like reluctant sentinels as they descended into a sunken glade, the rain easing to a mournful drizzle that pattered on leaves like whispered regrets. The shrine emerged from the mist, a circle of weathered standing stones, etched with swirling runes that pulsed faintly with inner light, as if the earth itself breathed through them. Moss draped the monoliths like veils of green sorrow, and at the center lay a shallow pool, its surface rippling with the storm's remnants, reflecting the slate-grey sky. Vines twisted around the stones, thorny and resilient, guarding secrets long buried under layers of leaf and legend. Thorn eased her down onto a flat slab, the stone cool and slick beneath her, seeping the chill into her bones. She shivered, vision blurring at the edges, but his hands were steady as he tore open her tunic, exposing the wound, a deep furrow from Vargas's blade, edges inflamed and pulsing with each heartbeat. The metallic tang of her blood filled the air, sharp against the shrine's earthy dampness. "Breathe," he commanded softly, his golden eyes locking onto hers, fierce with a protectiveness that bordered on anguish. From a pouch at his belt, hidden until now, he produced a vial of shimmering liquid, iridescent as moonlight on water. Moon essence, distilled from the pack's sacred springs. It'll knit the flesh, but it demands truth. Elara nodded weakly, her hand finding his, the calluses on his palm rough as bark against her skin. As he poured the essence over the gash, it burned like liquid starlight, searing through her veins and drawing a cry from her lips that echoed off the stones. But beneath the agony bloomed something deeper, a warmth that uncoiled in her chest, stirring echoes of her lost home. The flames that had scarred her, not just body, but soul. Visions flickered, her mother's hands weaving herbs by firelight, whispering of the earth's hidden gifts, bloodlines tied to the wild that the raiders had sought to purge. Thorn's free hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw, his touch an anchor amid the storm within. "You're no ordinary healer," he murmured, voice low and resonant, laced with wonder. "I felt it in the fight. Your strikes carried the wood's fury, not just a wanderer's grit. The runes here, they respond to you." Indeed, the stones hummed now, a subtle vibration that thrummed through the ground, the pool's surface swirling with ethereal patterns that mirrored the scars on her arms. Marks from the fire, she had thought. But now they glowed faintly, silver threads awakening. Tears mingled with the rain on her cheeks, not from pain, but from the flood of memory and revelation. "My mother," she spoke of the old blood, veiled witches bound to the land's spirit. "I buried it after the burning, fearing it drew the flames, but saving you." It called to me. Her voice cracked, vulnerability raw as exposed roots. Yet in his gaze she found no judgment, only recognition, a mirror to his own cursed legacy. He leaned closer, forehead resting against hers, the heat of him a balm against the shrine's chill. Their breaths synced, shallow and shared, the space between them charged with unspoken longing, a pull like the moon to the tide, destiny's inexorable draw. "Then we're both exiles of blood," Thorn whispered, his lips brushing her temple, sending sparks through her weary frame. "The false alpha fears us because together we could shatter his iron grip, but it comes at a cost. My shift grows wilder under the strain, and yours. It might consume you if not tamed." The intimacy shattered as a low rumble echoed from the tree line, not thunder, but the thunder of hooves and howls, a larger force, the guild's reinforcements, drawn by the shrine's faint magic like moths to flame. Thorn pulled away, his body coiling, partial shift rippling across his skin, fur shadowing his arms, claws curving from fingertips. Elara rose unsteadily, the moon essence weaving strength into her limbs, her scars now pulsing with a soft, verdant light that made the vines stir, thorns retracting as if in allegiance. They stood back to back as the hunters emerged, 24 strong, led by a sorceress in hooded robes, her staff crackling with suppression wards that hummed like angry bees. Rain-slicked armor gleamed under torchlight, faces twisted in zealous fury. "The pretenders will be done," the sorceress intoned, her voice a silken venom. "The rogue king and his witch pet die here, their blood to seal the pact." The battle ignited in a maelstrom of magic and claw. Thorn charged like a tempest, his roar shaking the stones as he tore into the front line, fangs sinking into leather and flesh, blood spraying in arcs that the rain diluted to pink rivulets. Elara channeled the shrine's power instinctively, her hands weaving patterns in the air. Vines erupted from the earth, coiling around legs and throats with thorny embraces, squeezing until screams cut short. An arrow found her shoulder, embedding deep with a jolt that buckled her knee, but she wrenched it free, blood fueling the earth's response. Roots bursting forth to impale a hunter mid-stride, pain and power blurred. Elara's vision tinged green as the land's spirit surged through her, wild and intoxicating, mirroring Thorn's feral grace. He fought to her side when a ward blast singed his flank, the magic forcing his shift to recede in agonizing waves, leaving him gasping. She countered with a pulse of her own, drawn from the pool, a wave of silvery light that shattered the sorceress's staff. The woman crumpling with a wail as backlash consumed her. The remaining hunters broke, fleeing into the storm as the shrine's runes flared brighter, a barrier of light sealing the glade. Elara collapsed into Thorn's arms, the exertion draining her, but alive, transformed, her powers no longer a buried curse but a blooming force. He held her close, his heart pounding against hers, the rain washing away the grime of battle. "You are the key," he breathed, awe and fear threading his words. "But they've seen it now. The false throne will send armies." In the shrine's glowing embrace, as night deepened and stars pierced the clouds, their bond solidified, a love forged in sacrifice, hinting at the rebirth that awaited, even as the distant horns of pursuit signaled the gathering storm. The night deepened over the whispering woods like a velvet shroud, stars winking through ragged clouds, as if weeping for the battles yet to come. The shrine's glow had faded to a soft ember, casting elongated shadows across the standing stones, where runes still hummed faintly, echoing the pulse of Elara's awakened blood. Rain lingered in the air, a misty veil that clung to skin and leaf alike, carrying the scent of wet stone and blooming nightshade. Sweet decay mingled with the sharp bite of her own drying blood. Thorn held her upright, his body a bulwark against the chill, his arm wrapped around her waist with a possessiveness that bordered on desperation. The wound in her shoulder throbbed, a dull ache laced with the moon essence's lingering fire, but it paled against the surge within her, a verdant current, wild and insistent, threading through her veins like roots seeking soil. They couldn't linger. The distant horns had swelled into a cacophony, the guild's full muster converging on the valley, armored legions from Eldoria's spires, their iron-shod boots trampling the sacred earth. Thorn's jaw tightened, his golden eyes reflecting the starlight with feral intensity, the partial shift still clinging to him in shadowed fur along his arms. "The false alpha leads them now," he murmured, voice rough as gravel underfoot, his breath warm against her ear. "Kyle, my brother's shadow, usurper of the Pack's throne. He wields the eclipse chain, forged from the moon's own tears, to bind alphas forever." The words tasted of betrayal, old wounds reopening like the gashes on his flesh, and Elara felt the echo in her own heart, the flames that had stolen her kin, leaving her adrift in solitude's cold embrace. She straightened, drawing strength from his nearness, her hand pressing against his chest where his heart thundered, a rhythm that synced with hers, destiny's inexorable drum. The scars on her arms glowed subtly, silver veins pulsing in time with the shrine's fading light, awakening memories of her mother's whispers. "The land chooses its guardians, child, in fire and shadow. No longer buried, the power uncoiled, vines stirring at her feet like loyal hounds, thorns retracting in deference." "Then we face him," Elara said, her voice steady, despite the tremor of fear, laced with a newfound resolve that tasted of earth and storm. "Not as prey, but as the storm he fears." They moved as one, slipping from the glade into the labyrinthine depths of the woods, where ancient oaks twisted into barriers of bark and branch, their roots arching like the spines of slumbering dragons. The mist thickened, swirling around their ankles with ghostly fingers, muffling the horns to an ominous drone. Elara's senses sharpened, the earth's whispers guiding her, the quiver of soil under approaching hooves, the faint metallic tang of enchanted steel on the wind. Thorn's hand clasped hers, calloused and warm, a tether against the encroaching dark, his touch igniting sparks that bloomed low in her belly, a forbidden tenderness amid the gathering fury. The confrontation erupted at the forest's edge, where the trees thinned to reveal Eldoria's shadowed outskirts, crumbling walls of vine-choked stone, torch-lit banners fluttering like wounded birds under the moon's accusatory gaze. Kael's forces spilled forth, a tide of armored hunters, spectral hounds baying with ethereal hunger. And at their helm, the false Alpha, astride a midnight stallion, his form cloaked in midnight fur that rippled unnaturally. Kael's eyes burned crimson, a mockery of Thorn's gold, his face a twisted echo of brotherhood scarred by ambition. In his gauntleted fist dangled the eclipse chain, links gleaming with suppressed moonlight, humming a dirge that clawed at Thorn's essence, urging the wolf within to submit. "Brother," Kael called, voice oily as serpent's hiss, carrying over the ranks like a curse. "You've dragged a witch into our blood feud. The packs kneel to me now. Eldoria's throne secured by iron and silence. Yield, and I'll spare her the pyre." His gaze raked Elara, venomous and appraising, as if she were a trinket to be crushed. Thorn stepped forward, shielding her, his body coiling with primal rage, claws lengthening as the shift warred against the chain's distant pull. "You stole my throne with lies and blades, Kael. The pack's blood cries for justice." A roar built in his chest, shaking the ground, but the chain's magic lashed out, invisible tendrils snaking through the air to wrap his limbs, forcing him to his knees with a guttural snarl. Pain etched his features, sweat beading on his brow, mingling with the mist. Vulnerable yet unbroken, his eyes locking on Elara's with a plea wrapped in fire. The hunters surged, arrows whistling like vengeful spirits, but Elara unleashed the land's fury. Her hands splayed, scars blazing emerald, and the earth responded, a tremor that split the ground. Roots erupting like spears to impale the front line, screams mingling with the crack of bone. Vines lashed from the trees, coiling around throats and limbs, thorns drawing blood in crimson rivulets that fed the soil. She moved through the chaos like a tempest incarnate, dagger flashing to sever a hound's tether, the beast dissolving into shrieks of shadow. An arrow grazed her cheek, hot and stinging, but she pressed on, power surging wilder, intoxicating, yet it clawed at her core, demanding more, threatening to consume her fragile humanity. Kael dismounted, chain whipping toward her, its links biting into her arm with icy fire that seared her veins, suppressing the green glow. She staggered, vision blurring, the earth's pulse fading to a whisper as agony bloomed. Thorn broke free in a frenzy, lunging at his brother with fangs bared, but Kael met him blow for blow, claws rending fur and flesh, blood spraying in the torchlight. They tumbled into the fray, brothers locked in savage dance, each strike a echo of lost kinship. Thorn's raw power against Kael's calculated cruelty. Elara fought the chain's bind, her free hand clawing at the earth, nails breaking on stone as she poured her will into the ground. The power rebelled, a torrent that ripped through her, visions of flames devouring her village, her mother's dying plea, "Embrace it, or it claims you." Sacrifice burned in her chest. To save him, she must lose the last veil of her guarded self. With a cry that blended grief and glory, she shattered the suppression, the chain fracturing in a burst of silver shards. The backlash hurled her back, slamming her against a ruined wall, ribs cracking with white-hot pain, blood filling her mouth, something vital torn away, her human frailty laid bare. But the release awakened full. The woods roared to life, trees bending to crush Kael's flanks, roots ensnaring his steed in a fatal embrace. Thorn pinned his brother, claws at throat, golden eyes stormy with sorrow. End it, Kyle, for the Pax. A mercy kill, fangs sinking deep, the false alpha's crimson gaze dimming to grey as life ebbed, the eclipse chain crumbling to dust. The hunters scattered, horns silenced in defeat, the night swallowing their retreat. Thorn staggered to Elara, collapsing beside her amid the settling dust, his hands trembling as they traced her wounds, the deep gash on her arm, the bloom of bruises across her side. Rain began anew, soft and cleansing, washing the blood from their skin as dawn's first blush tainted the horizon pink. She leaned into him, breath ragged, the power now a quiet hum within, tempered by loss, a piece of her innocence sacrificed, revealing the guardian she was born to be. "You're free," she whispered, fingers weaving into his hair, their foreheads touching in the fragile light. A gaze that spoke of impossible love forged in fire, a king's heart claimed by a witch's wild soul. The woods sighed around them, ancient witness to rebirth, as the first rays pierced the mist, promising a throne reclaimed, not in iron, but in intertwined destinies. Yet in the distance, echoes lingered, whispers of lingering shadows, the cost of power's dawn. Dawn's tentative light seeped through the mist-shrouded tree line, painting the bloodied earth in strokes of rose and amber, as if the sky itself sought to mend the night's wounds. The air hung thick with the scent of churned soil and fading iron, blood and rain mingling in a bittersweet perfume that clung to Elara's skin like a lover's regret. She lay cradled in Thorn's arms amid the ruins of the confrontation, her body a tapestry of aches, the jagged tear on her arm from the shattered chain pulsing with a dull fire, the cracked ribs that stole her breath with every shallow inhale, the metallic tang of blood on her tongue, a reminder of the power's voracious toll. Yet beneath the pain stirred a quiet vitality, the earth's essence woven into her veins, no longer a buried whisper but a steady rhythm, sinking with the wild beat of Thorn's heart against her cheek. He held her as if she were the last fragile thread of his unraveling world, his breath ragged and warm, carrying the faint musk of exertion and untamed fur. His own wounds wept crimson, deep gashes from Kale's claws raking his chest, the eclipse chain's remnants leaving silvery burns that etched like forbidden runes across his flesh. But his golden eyes, softened by exhaustion and awe, roamed her face, tracing the smear of dirt and blood on her cheek, the faint glow fading from her scars. "You shattered it," he murmured, voice hoarse as wind through hollow reeds, his fingers gentle as they brushed a damp strand from her forehead. "The chain. My prison. For you, Elara, I'd burn the world to ash." She managed a weak smile, her hand rising to cup his jaw, revealing the rough stubble and the tremor of emotion beneath. The touch ignited embers in her core, a tenderness born of shared savagery, impossible love blooming from the thorns of sacrifice. Visions lingered at the edges of her mind, the flames of her village, now transmuted into the green fire of her awakening, Kyle's final gasp, not just a brother's end, but the breaking of chains that had bound the Pax in shadow. "We both did," she whispered, her voice threading through the dawn's hush like ivy on stone. "Your roar called the wild back to you, and I lost the fear that caged me." The woods stirred around them, ancient oaks creaking like weary sentinels, their leaves rustling in a breeze that carried the distant calls of awakening birds, harbingers of renewal amid the carnage. Bodies lay scattered, hunters crumpled in twisted poses, spectral hounds dissipated into wisps of ether, Kyle's form still and pale at the forest's edge, his crimson eyes forever dulled. The eclipse chain's dust glittered on the ground, catching the light like fallen stars, a symbol of the false throne's collapse. Thorn shifted slightly, wincing as he pulled her closer, their blood mingling on the earth below, a crimson vow etched into the soil. But peace was fleeting. Hoofbeats echoed from the east, not the thunder of pursuit, but a measured cadence accompanied by low howls that rose and fell like a mournful dirge. Thorn tensed, his body coiling instinctively, but recognition softened his snarl into a wary hope. From the mist emerged a ragged procession, shifters from the hidden clans, their forms a blend of man and wolf, fur-mantled shoulders, eyes gleaming with wary gold. At their fore rode an elder, grizzled and scarred, his cloak woven from silver-threaded pelts, bearing the ancient pack sigil, a crescent moon entwined with thorns. "Alpha," the elder intoned, dismounting with a bow that rippled through the ranks, voices murmuring in awe as they beheld Thorn amid the fallen. "The false one's death echoes in our blood, the packs stir from exile. We felt the chain break, your claim renews us." His gaze shifted to Elara, sharpening with ancient knowledge, and the land's guardian, the witch blood foretold, she who mends the rift. Thorn rose slowly, supporting Elara as she stood on trembling legs, the earth's pulse steadying her. Pain lanced through her side, but she met the elder's eyes with quiet defiance, her scars now faint silver lines, badges of transformation rather than torment. The shifters knelt, a sea of bowed heads and bared throats, the air humming with primal energy, a tide of loyalty reclaimed, washing away years of fracture. Thorn's hand tightened on hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, a silent anchor in the swelling moment. "The throne is not mine alone," he declared, voice resonant as a howl across the veils, carrying the weight of kingship rediscovered. "Eldoria's shadows end here. We rebuild, not with iron, but with the wild's truth. And she—" He turned to Elara, his gaze a blaze of unspoken vows, fierce and tender. "She is the heart of it." The elder nodded, a faint smile cracking his weathered face as the first rays of sun pierced the canopy fully, bathing them in golden warmth that chased the mist away. Elara felt the shift within, no longer the solitary wanderer haunted by flames, but a force intertwined with Thorn's destiny, her power a bridge between man, beast, and land. Yet the cost lingered, a hollow ache where her guarded isolation had once shielded her, now replaced by vulnerability's sharp edge, the fear of loss in love's uncharted depths. As the packs gathered closer, sharing salves and cloaks, the dawn chorus swelled, birds and distant wolves harmonizing in tentative hope. Thorn pulled her aside to a mossy knoll overlooking the glade, the world below stirring with purpose, scouts fanning out to reclaim the woods, healers tending the wounded. He knelt before her, not as king, but as man, his hands framing her face, thumbs wiping away the last traces of blood. "In saving me, you saved us all," he breathed, leaning in until their lips met. Soft at first, then deepening with the hunger of survivors, tasting of salt and earth, a seal on their impossible bond. She kissed him back, fingers tangling in his hair, the world fading to the warmth of his mouth, the steady thrum of shared life. When they parted, a single scar traced her lip from the night's fray, a mark of sacrifice glinting in the light like a promise. The sun crested fully, casting long shadows that danced rather than clawed, the whispering woods exhaling in relief. In that gaze they shared, golden meeting emerald, lay redemption. A king restored, a witch reborn, their love the dawn's first light, piercing eternal night. Yet as horns sounded the pack's return to the heartlands, whispers of lingering threats echoed faintly. Eldoria's spires not yet fallen, but the path ahead blazed with purpose, intertwined and unbreakable.